Hello, my name is Mary Alice Herbert. I live in Putney, and I'm a member of the Socialist Party USA. And I'm chair of our local group that meets here in Brattleboro. In 2004, I was the Socialist Party's candidate for Vice President of the United States. And I'm here today to interview Jerry Levy, who is offering to be the presidential candidate for the Socialist Party USA, and will be going to their convention, which is being held in Los Angeles in October, with this idea in mind. And so I'm going to ask him some questions. Jerry, why are you seeking the nomination for president in the Socialist Party USA?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to say thank you, Mal, for interviewing me, and the other members of the local here, and Tom Fennell for doing this video. I had not planned to be a candidate for the Socialist Party USA. In many ways, I don't think I'm the ideal candidate this year. I had hoped that since we are a feminist party, that a number of qualified women would be a candidate. And I had a faint hope that possibly I might be a vice presidential candidate. But unfortunately, no one has stepped forward that I know and I can support. And so a number of people asked me recently whether I would be a candidate, and I said I would consider it if no one stepped forward. And to my knowledge, no one has. So I thought about it while I was touring Marx in Soho and Wally Shawn's The Fever in Europe. And I remember 2 conventions ago saying that it is our moral duty to have candidates at the national and state level. And if we are a political party, we must do this for the good of the country, for the good of the party, and for the good of the world. And at no time in my lifetime have the contradictions of capitalism been so severe and have so many hundreds of millions of people been thrown into suffering because of the irrational, immoral, and unworkable nature of global capitalism. So I thought that I would seek the candidacy if people asked me. And when I came back from my tour, I recognized that I did have some support, and no one had stepped forward. So I decided that I would actively seek the presidential nomination, and here I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you consider your qualifications and limitations as a presidential candidate?
Well, in some ways, everything I've done in my life has been a preparation for this movement, for this election. I have been a teacher all my life, a college teacher. I was converted to socialism in my teens. As a youth, I was inspired by the writings of Erich Fromm and Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Marx and Noam Chomsky and Richard Barnett and many people. And I also was an activist in college, and I would go to demonstrations where Norman Thomas and David Dellinger and I.F. Stone spoke, and I was inspired by them, and I thought that it is important that that kind of inspiration remain. So I'd always been looking for a political party that would provide that inspiration for socialism, and I helped found the YPSL at the University of Illinois, and I've been a member of the Socialist Party on and off for over a half a century. I've studied political economy. I've been a civil rights activist and an anti-war activist. I've been a member of the Liberty Union Party in Vermont with you and Peter Diamondstone and Doris Lake and Jane Newton and others, and have been a candidate for office many times for the U.S. Senate, where I engaged in what I believe to be significant election bids, spending 6-8 months crisscrossing the state, giving it everything I had. The results, it is not for me to say, but I do think that the combined work of the Liberty Union Party has affected politics in Vermont in a positive direction. I've been an actor and a musician, and I feel that always in my theater work, I have tried to be in plays that had significant political and social content, often from a socialist perspective, the works of Arthur Miller and Ibsen and Lillian Hellman and others, and Gorky. That has been part of my work, and I feel that touring all over the world, in Europe, the United States, Canada, Central America, over 200 performances of Marx and Soho, 11 performances of Wally Shawn's The Fever, has been fundamentally political work in which my intention has been to engage in a critique of society and offer solutions from a socialist perspective, to invite conversation, to inspire people, young people and others to be engaged, to spread goodwill, and to learn about what's going on in the world and all over the country. So everywhere I went, every town and every city that I engaged in, performed in, I would listen to people's troubles, their suffering. So to say that my touring was fundamentally political, I continue to be inspired by socialism, by the statement of principles and the platform. And although I am in my early 70s, I am computer illiterate, and I have all sorts of other limitations, I would give it my best.
Jerry, you mentioned YPSL, and for people who may be listening to this who are not familiar with the Socialist Party, what does that stand for?
YPSL is the Young People's Socialist League. It has been the tradition of the Socialist Party to have a youth group who would have their own autonomy and would join the party. And I think it's because of YPSL that probably the Socialist Party USA has survived all these years, because we do have youth who are continually coming into the party and revitalizing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What qualities would you look for in a vice presidential candidate?
I think the vice presidential candidate should be a woman. We are a feminist party, and a woman should be at the head of the ticket, because a woman has not been at the head of the ticket the last two elections. And if we call ourselves feminist, we have in all the elected offices we have gender balance, and I think we should have gender balance at the head of the at the top of the ticket. I think that a vice presidential candidate would balance the skills and knowledge that I do not have. Mm-hmm. That she would be able to talk about women's issues with greater familiarity. She would lend a wonderful perspective to, I hope, would be a good ticket. And I'm saying now, I will not be a vice presidential candidate, because I do not think, if I do not get the nomination, because I think we should have gender balance.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, maybe you can find a woman who is very computer literate. That might be a help. That would balance things out a
That
little.
would be terrific, and I want to say to those who have been calling me a Luddite, I am not.
No.
I do believe in the internet. I could never have done the touring that I did without internet help. I have a manager who does all that work for me. I am what you call learning challenged. And I have blockages and fears and phobias. And I was reading something in the platform that said we should not, people who have disabilities or challenges should not be discriminated against. If you feel that my computer illiteracy disqualifies me for being a candidate, then so be it.
Well, I don't see why it should. Well, how do you envision your candidacy? How would you organize it? What would be your priorities? And what help will you need?
Well, I would plan to give it a year, starting right after the convention, part-time until May 15th, when Marlborough College year is over, full-time during the summer until I go back to work, and 1 day a week at Marlborough College. So up until mid-May, I would, along with my other activities, visit locals to organize, not my campaign, I don't like the word, organize my election bid, my candidacy, whatever you call it. I would visit locals, listen to their needs, and plan times that I would come and spend a day or a week, depending on what they were willing to do. My hope is that these locals would organize speaking engagements, performances, potluck suppers, media, visits to schools, factories, anywhere to witness ecological disasters in the area, to talk to people who are impoverished, to articulate the vision of socialism to them, and to articulate the principles and the platform. I never cease to be inspired by both, and it would be my job to bring these two wonderful documents to the people. So I would basically start by going down the Atlantic coast to the south, go across the south, spend time in California, come back to the Midwest by Labor Day, and then when I went back to teach at Marlborough College 1 day a week, I would blanket the Northeast coast and the Mid-Atlantic, and I would make forays into important events for the election. But the important thing would be the role of the locals, and I ask you, if I do get the nomination, what are you prepared to do for me? There's a wonderful model in Vermont where every time the Socialist Party won our primary, Peter Diamondstone and others would take these people around the state and help them with their election, whether he agreed with all their stands on the issues or not. So I would hope that the locals would be a major factor in organizing my election bid. I also hope that I would have internet help from the party and, of course, a modicum of fundraising. One idea would be that I would do performances which would raise money for local candidates or for the party. I've done that in the past.
Well, it sounds as though you're really on the right track. How would you, when you're speaking to non-socialist audiences, how would you articulate a democratic socialist critique of capitalism? And and and, um, and a vision for the future that's not capitalist, that a socialistic vision for the future without alienating your audience.
Well, that may be difficult to do, but I think most of the audience is alienated anyway. They know that the capitalist system is rotten to the core. They know what the banks are doing, what the corporations are doing. They just don't really know what to do about it. So I don't think that anything I would say would particularly surprise them. They might be a little miffed at my interpretations of international policy because that, more than anything else, is kept for the people. But as I've done in the past, I would try and criticize the society without criticizing individuals, and that I would offer an alternative which is not even considered as an alternative in political debate in this country. I would talk about building up society, socialism from the roots, in towns, in communities. I would talk about how it's all in the platform, the statement of principles, that we must take the wealth and vitality of this country and stop devoting it to war and banking and weapons system and the destructions of other peoples. We must withdraw from our bases abroad, and we must begin to use our wealth and ingenuity and people power to provide services. Money which is taxed must go back to local communities, to have clinics, to have schools, to help seniors, children, women, people with disease, to prevent illness, to support non-invasive agriculture, all of those things that are in the platform. And that the wonderful actions that people are doing in their communities is a beginning towards building socialism. The problem is that we have a banking system and a Congress and a presidency and a corporate world run by an elite of self-serving people who then take our wealth, our energy, and use it for destructive purposes.
One of the things that I have learned about capitalism is that, like cancer, it's an organism that can only survive by continuing to expand. And maybe we're reaching a stage in the world where that kind of expansion is no longer possible because we are faced with global warming. Already the effects of it are widespread in countries around the world, mainly around the equator and, those areas. That so many of the wars that are going on have been started in the first place by problems with climate change. And how do you envision a socialist world in response to those challenges?
The people, not private individuals or corporations, own the water, the air, the wood, the farmland. Nobody should have those basic resources for their own use or to make profit. So that those basic resources which have been stolen from the people must be returned to the people with their capacity to administrate them at the local level. So we must really, Vermont, there wouldn't be a question of Vermont Yankee leaving Vermont. It would have left 30 years ago if it was up to the people. There would be no question that some federal agency could dictate that we have that cancer-spreading entity in our midst.
That nuclear power plant.
There would be no question about how we would use the resources of Vermont. We would be getting our fair share of tax money, and we would be free to build the local society that we want, as every state and every region in the country would. And so ecological disaster is a direct result of capitalism, that capitalism keeps it in place, and that as we move towards a socialist society, people would be able to take ecological matters in their own hands. Corporations would no longer be individuals with the power of large industrial societies, but would lose their wealth, their resources, and we, the people, would decide what agriculture is going to be like in Windham County, and how we're going to feed the poor, and how we're going to clean up the terrible disaster that the flood caused. Mm-hmm. We would have the resources. We would not have to apply for them by filling out endless forms, but the money would be there instead of weapon systems and depleted uranium and all that nonsense.
One of the things that about being a candidate who can't expect to win the position you're a candidate for, but who feels passionate about the point of view that needs to be expressed and that people need to hear, is difficult at times, because you're often called a spoiler. People are afraid to vote for you, even though you represent what they want. As Eugene Debs said, I'd rather vote for what I want and not get it than vote for what I don't want and get it. But with the difficulty of getting on the ballot, in states have such different requirements for getting on the ballot. It's hard for everyone to hear the message, and so I just would like to feel out your philosophy on that question. I know I had to wrestle with it.
Well, yes. My philosophy on that question is that people have been wasting their votes by voting for presidential candidates in the Republican and Democratic Party, because look what we've gotten. Mm-hmm. And anybody who has even a cursory history of the last 30 or 40 years knows that we have lost most of the reform, social democracy gains that we've made. So I would say to those people, we missed a chance to build a social movement that would give us the things that we need permanently, that it is you people who have wasted your vote. With all due respect, you have a right to waste your vote. You have a right to vote for who you want. But I personally feel that you have wasted your vote, and if we had built a social movement, we would not be where we are. And so I certainly have the right to go around and try and articulate an alternative. And even now, it's not too late to have a protest vote, because we need, if there is a kind of vacuum of silence on the left, where people say to me, well, shut up about international policy. We're going to get health care in the Clinton administration. Did we get health care? No. We got war, and we got a welfare bill.
That's right.
And all of that nonsense. So, yes, people are concerned. I think they're often short-sighted, but this is a different year. People are suffering in ways that, in my memory, I didn't live during the Depression. So maybe it's a time where a socialist message may have some kind of greater effect. I would hope so.
I'm just sorry that it won't get more of an audience, because there will be a number of states that it'll be just difficult to get on the ballot, to be on the ballot.
Well, let's not be so pessimistic. That's not the way I'm going to engage in my election bid. I'm going to pretend that I can go everywhere and that I can ignite, with help from the locals, a greater response. When I was first a candidate for the U.S. Senate, it was my hope that I would inspire hundreds of young people to run for office in the Liberty Union Party. That didn't happen, but not for lack of effort.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have to be realistic, but I'm not going to be overly concerned with the millions of people who will vote from their perspective for the lesser of two evils. I'm going to go out, if I get the nomination, and try and articulate a vision that might be more attractive to them. I don't know. We can never know the results of our efforts, but I think we have to engage in our efforts full-heartedly, and I have the time and I hope the energy to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just have to see.
Yes. Well, I certainly found being a national candidate for the Socialist Party USA a really rewarding experience, because I got to see what socialists were doing in their own communities and met so many wonderful people, people that I feel very inspired by. It was a wonderful experience, so I'm hoping that you enjoy it as much as, that you will enjoy it as much as I did. One of the things, though, that's discouraging about American politics is that our rate of voter participation is very low. I mean, we're like around 199th out of, or 200th out of the, whatever the total number of countries in the world is. And I think that if we were able, if it were possible, if it were easier to have more parties, more people would fit themselves into the political spectrum and more people would vote, because there would be something they really could wholeheartedly vote for.
Well, they have to be inspired to vote. Uh-huh. And if we talk to them or meet with them and they choose not to vote, that's their right. I can see people who have, from their perspective, every reason for not voting. My point will be, if you vote for either of the two candidates in the major parties, you will be wasting your vote. But if you vote for me or some other alternative candidate, maybe something will begin to germinate and build. And I think we have to start an election bid with the notion that anything is possible and we must give our full effort. So I've thought about all those things that you think about, but I can't really be too concerned with them, because what I am prepared to do is to go everywhere where there is any possibility of a spark of socialism and see what happens. And I want to say to, I think because this video is primarily, this is a video that is going to be distributed to the people who are attending the convention, is that I will be coming to the convention. I will be available to talk with all of you and to answer your questions, and I hope that you will remain uncommitted and really see what the other candidates have to say. Any other questions?
Well, are there issues in the platform with which you personally disagree, or how would you handle anything that's sort of a socialist, maybe a socialist?
I read the platform. There's little that I disagree with. On the face of it, I think something that's missing from the platform in terms of our international policy is the issue of reparations. I think that for all the destruction we've caused in the world, that in all the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the war in Bosnia, everywhere we have been, we have caused immense suffering. Our support of Israel in their occupation of Palestine and everything that's happened to the Palestinians, we should be engaged in giving billions of dollars of reparations to the people who have suffered. And I think if we were to engage in that, it would signal a massive change in our international policy, and we might be viewed differently in the world. And certainly in a socialist society, the first premise is, as Gertrude Stein put it, a child is a child is a child. A murder is a murder is a murder. A rape is a rape is a rape. When you go into a house, kick down their door, machine gun their women and children, that's what it is. And what I really love about our party is that we have universal principles that not only apply to others but apply to us.
Yeah, and we certainly are opposed to war. And if you think of the influence the United States could be having if we dealt with countries in the way you've just spoken of, rather than sending in the military. And it's bad for this country, too, because it seems as though the only jobs program, the federal jobs program, is going into the for young people is going into the military. Is there anything very important that isn't already in there that you think should go in this year's platform?
I read the platform twice, and I had not read it in a year. I would have to study that more carefully. I invite from the party position papers on everything. I have been out doing my work for socialism, touring. Send me through email your position papers, your issues, so I can get some sense of what issues are going to be brought to the fore at the convention. I read the statements of principles and I read the platform, and I think it's a good statement. I don't think there's another party that comes close to the ability to articulate a vision of socialism. I am inspired by the work that dozens, perhaps hundreds of comrades have done over the years to write this document, and I, with respect to women's issues, youth, the elderly, taxation, it is very, very good. I think that when I was a candidate for the U.S. Senate, I was allowed to make my own program, and I put not just that eventually taxation of the rich would go to 100%, but while there are people in the world who are starving, that there would be a limitation put on certain assets, because it doesn't matter how kind a billionaire is. Why should a billionaire have the power through philanthropy to determine how the resources of the world are distributed? We should all have a say in that. Why should the national security bureaucracy make decisions about war and peace? We should be making decisions about war and peace, and hopefully always for peace, because war rarely, if ever, solves anything. So I think that I think we have to pay more attention to taxation policy and assets policy. And I like the idea of a maximum income and a minimum income, but I think we have to go further and say those who have accumulated in their families millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars through the democratic process, not through some totalitarian regime, but through the democratic process, should be urged to give it up by the majority, so that until others can live a life in dignity. I'm not opposed to wealth. I'm not opposed to having people having 2 or 3 houses, but before that, everybody should have a place to live.
Mm.
I'm not opposed to people getting the best health care in the world, but we should all get the best health care in the world. And that's the principle of socialism, which is embedded again and again and again in these documents. I'm inspired by it. I embrace it, and it would be my privilege and honor to go around the country trying to articulate that vision.
Well, that sounds inspiring. What would be your attitude toward other candidates for president on the left, and would you seek the nomination from other political parties on the left?
I think that would be up to the party. I'm not opposed to that. I'm open to that, but I would not seek it unless I was directed by the party to do so, because I think that these are things that the party should decide, whether we want to engage in coalitions, whether I want to seek the nomination in some other party, and I am neither for it or against it. I would do the will of the party, however that might be determined, and it may be that we do not want to seek any other, or we might want to, and that is something that would have to be decided. But I would treat the other candidates on the left with respect in forums, and I would, when I was a candidate in the Liberty Union Party, we always treated people we mostly agreed with tremendous respect, and we would form coalitions in debates and forums to further the cause of our ideas, not to necessarily struggle for votes, competing with each other.
You've kind of talked about this a little bit, but how would you kind of integrate your performing into your candidacy?
Yeah, I think that my work of the last 8 years has been fundamentally political. It's been everything I've done in my life, teaching, acting, other things, my study of political economy, the books I've written, has been a preparation to do something like this. So when I went to the locals, if they wanted me to perform, I would perform. They would have to get permission from the Zinn family and from the arts organization that has the rights to the Fever, and I would perform or not perform depending on what they wanted. And if there were other groups in the area that wanted me to perform and raise money for them, I've raised tens of thousands of dollars for good causes. I would continue to do a modicum of that, but my first priority would be to serve each local and go to every state where people would have me, and certainly all the states that were on the ballot. And I would engage, I would go to states where we were trying to get on the ballot and partake in the signature getting process. But it's really, what I'm saying is, it's up to you how much you're going to engage me, and I hope that you will, every local I go to will have at least a few days crowded with different kinds of events that I will partake in. And if you don't, I'm not going to stay around very long because I have work to do.
I am thinking about, as we think so much about taxation, about taxing the rich, and that seems to be one of our socialist slogans, it's tax the rich. And I remember in my studying and learning that the period the tax system that FDR put into place at the end, at the end of the Depression was so fair that no great new fortunes were created during that period until it began to be broken down by the 1970s by both Democrats and Republicans, lowered the top tax rates on the wealthy. And it always seems as though they bring up the argument that, taxing the rich will, that those are people who provide jobs. But I don't think there's ever been any. Have you ever heard of any evidence that shows that the wealthy create jobs, that allowing them to be very wealthy helps create jobs?
Well, they create jobs as long as they're getting a profit. The problem with the wealthy should not be in the business of creating jobs. We, in our local communities, with the resources should be creating not jobs, but meaningful work. Not careers, but the opportunity to engage in meaningful work, and a life of dignity should be available. And by a life of dignity, I mean a place to live, education, health care, free from cradle to grave, transportation should be available whether people can work or not. And my experience has been is that most people want to work, and most people are given jobs, but they don't have meaningful work, and the jobs are underpaid, and the jobs keeps them from engaging in political activity. And we are all frantically rushing around, trying to survive so that nothing of any political significance ever happens. So jobs, it's great to have jobs, but it's not enough. It's meaningful work.
Yes.
And a life of dignity that socialism wants to create, not what we have now is people engaging in cutthroat competition who are overqualified for jobs that don't exist. And so, as it says in the platform, is that we create a situation where people are struggling for jobs, nothing gets done, and the national security bureaucracy, the bank and the establishment, goes about its merry way of creating havoc and destruction in the world and absorbing all the wealth.
Yes.
So, yes, jobs for everybody, but meaningful work and a dignified life for everybody with the time to develop oneself, whether one has a job or not, whether one works or not, and that everybody should have the opportunity to engage in meaningful work.
And a society, I'm sure that what you're thinking of is a society that's based on cooperation rather than competition. Sometimes competition leads to sameness, because when you're competing, you have to be as much like what you're competing against, only better at it, that some things get lost, that the quality of life. And
I don't want to eliminate or legislate the elimination of competition. I think that human beings have a natural propensity to cooperate. The anarchist said this very well, and that we have developed some pretty nasty habits of competition. I think a modicum of competition with a lot of cooperation goes a long way. To try and eliminate competition, we could try and set up a totalitarian state. Well, we're going to eliminate. We're going to eliminate competition by putting everybody in retraining camps and putting things in their brains so they'll change. So we'll undo 10,000 years of genetics. I think is utopian, but there is a place for cooperation. We've seen it during this latest disaster to some extent.
And there are other compensations besides money in life. I mean, this kind of just unconscionable rate that CEOs are paid like 650 times more than the average worker. That there does, and I think that, as you touched on, that a maximum income. I mean, if we're going to have a minimum wage, how about a maximum wage?
Well,
And then when in this next election, there'll be a lot of talk about Social Security, and one candidate's called it a Ponzi
it's
scheme.
obscene. It's obscene and grotesque that some of my best friends are trying to live on $700-800 a month on Social Security. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves that we have allowed it to come to this. I like in the platform or statements of principles a minimum yearly income of $25,000 to $30,000 for every. It should be every man, woman, gender, mixed or child. And I don't know if that's enough now. However, if a lot of things were free, that is to say, if health care and education and transportation and housing and food was assured, then yes, we would need a few things, some money, but as much as possible, what it takes to live a dignified life, whatever that is, that should be our priority. And if we were to shift our priorities and our values, we could meet those needs easily and not be fighting over crumbs,
Yes.
which is what we are doing now.
I remember when I was a candidate in 2004, the Pentagon had wanted some reports on. There was one on terrorism, and it turned out that we're actually, what the report came back about global warming was that we're actually in more danger from global warming than we are from terrorism, because there could be nuclear wars fought over water, for example.
I like the platform. We oppose the war on terrorism. Pure and simple. It is a device for controlling the society, accepting militarism, accepting austerity, and doing away with our civil liberties. It is totally unacceptable. And I'll go further. There is enough evidence to show, and I think our party should take this up. The Socialist Party USA, if it hasn't already, should call for an investigation of the findings on 9/11. We should look at the documentaries. We should read the books, and we should decide. We, by not making this a issue of debate within our party, and I don't think we have, or not taking a stand on this, we contribute to a conspiracy of silence about a very, very important issue that anybody in the two major parties who calls for an investigation is immediately marginalized. And I think that we, as an alternative party, have the moral duty to take this on as an issue. So I didn't see anything about 9/11 other than the consequences of 9/11, that we should reject the consequences of 9/11, and I'm totally in favor in that. What about the nature of 9/11 and what had happened? And whenever I raise it among my liberal friends, they go crazy. They get angry, and there is a conspiracy of silence on this issue, which I think the Socialist Party USA can no longer avoid.
With the state of intelligence in the world, I mean, it seems very likely to believe at least that our government knew something was going to happen. and then to take an act of terrorism. Terrorism is a crime. It's not an act of war. It's not done by countries against each other. And the fact that we have responded with the way we did and the damage we've caused by treating it as an act of war and waging war on countries rather than solving the problem through investigations. I mean, if the CIA and every other secret service in the world had cooperated, think what might have happened.
After World War II, after the Vietnam War, after 9/11, we might have had a deep discussion in our society about who we are, where are we going, and how do we want to change. In those instances, none of those discussions or debates took place. Until that debate happens, very little is going to change because we are wedded to very, very destructive ideas and institutions. And there's something else that isn't in the platform or the statement of principles that I would like to see. There's no discussion of the national security bureaucracy, which is it's a self-serving kind of caste that really runs the country. Mm-hmm. And every single president appoints the same people to it. Until that national security bureaucracy, as well as the corporate world and the banks, is significantly changed, we won't be able to do anything because they, along with the president and the Congress through their inaction, are making the decisions that run this country. So this country is run by basically a couple thousand individuals, and the entire society colludes in it. So I would, at some point, like to see in the platform some discussion, a more detailed discussion of how we are going to replace the people who really run this country and who stay in their positions no matter who is elected president. And if I were elected president, the first thing I would do is I would appoint people who are outside of that establishment as advisors, because it is they who set the tone of the debate, make the decision, advise the presidents, and keep us exactly where we are.
Well, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Mel. You've been wonderful, and I invite you right here that I would be very, very happy if you were the vice presidential candidate.
Oh,
and I would be happy to nominate you at the convention and work for your election.
Oh, well, thank you. When I did it...
And if you decided to be the presidential candidate, I would step aside and graciously take the vice presidential candidacy.
Oh, no. I think it was one thing to do it when I was 69, but I'm coming up on 77, and I think I just don't have the energy anymore. But thank you so much, and good luck.